All right, now we welcome into the minor lounge my good friend Tarun Sharma, a 3L at the University of Minnesota Law School and one of the co-hosts of Conduct Detrimental podcast. That's available anywhere you can listen to your podcasts. They have a new website that just launched recently, the conductdetrimental.com website. Tarun, great to have you on. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well, Andrew. It's always good to see you, man. And yeah, really excited to be able to hop in the lounge here.
Yeah. We'll keep it casual, and I know that you're over there in New York, and I know a lot of our friend group from high school is kind of scattered around the country. But I know we stay in touch, continue to talk about sports, and I always appreciate that keeping us together. But you were the first person that I thought of when the name, image, and likeness deal, the NIL, was finally approved for college athletics for the student athletes to start benefiting and profiting off their name, image, and likeness. And really wanted to have you on the lounge because I thought that was just right up your alley, right in your wheelhouse. Studying law at the University of Minnesota, but also working very closely with the Conduct Detrimental team.
Yeah, thanks. And again, really appreciate the opportunity to be on. As far as our group of friends, I think that sports continuously proves itself to be like a great uniter of people, and so that's one of the reasons why I think we're both so passionate about it, and have made these attempts to continue to pursue sports and get more serious about it as we've gone beyond high school. And so yeah, this is a thrill for me, man.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about what you're doing at Conduct Detrimental, and and everything you're studying at Minnesota, kind of before we jump into the NIL stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So Conduct Detrimental is a podcast. It's primarily run by Dan Wallach and Dan Lust, and so we've got a few other people in our group, Mike and Stephanie, and it's been a really great opportunity to be able to learn more about the issues that are at the intersection of sports and law, which is something that I'm really excited about. And so Dan Lust is somebody that I was interacting with on Twitter, and then we finally talked in person. He saw that I was a real human being, and so he brought me on board, and I've had an opportunity to join them for some of the podcasts. Like you mentioned, we just launched conductdetrimental.com. So now we've got a writing component for anybody who's interested. So if you are interested, anybody who's listening to this, please feel free to reach out to me, and we can see what you might be able to write for the website. That would be great. So yeah, it's just been a really great experience, and really deepening my understanding of these issues. And yeah, it's just been really fun, man.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I know obviously you were interested in law for a while. I was actually at the we've gone to a few Final Fours together now, and it was at the 2019 Final Four in Minneapolis, where you were kind of checking out their law school at the same time and applying to different law schools, and Minnesota, of course, being one of them. Just how's that experience been at Minnesota?
Yeah, so it's been great in that I got an opportunity to see the school, which I probably would not have done if we weren't there for the Final Four, and being able to check out the surroundings, and speaking to Professor Zamoff, who's been a mentor to me there, and really getting involved with the sports there, and becoming passionate about that. I've never gone to a big public university before, so that's been just a really cool experience. And they had their best football season since the 40s or something like that during my first year. Unfortunately, with the with the pandemic and all, we've been at home and remote for the last year and a half. But I'm really grateful that we had that semester plus, where I was able to meet a great group of guys and build that camaraderie, because otherwise I'm not sure how that experience would have been. But I'm really excited to be able to go back to Minneapolis in the fall, and hopefully to work there going forward.
Yeah, that's great. And of course, Minnesota, Penn State, you were at that. College Game Day was at that game. Big upset by the Golden Gophers. Now those players, back then they couldn't profit off their name, image, and likeness. Now they can. July 1st, the NCAA passed legislation uniformly, across all divisions, saying that student athletes can profit off them with just a few exceptions. And mainly they have to comply by either state law, if there is one, or the university institution policies. So, first reaction, rapid reaction of what you were thinking of when NIL was finally passed, whether it's thinking back to, suspensions or things like that, records that were stripped away in the past, or, were you thinking more of a futuristic mindset of where is this taking us? What were your first reactions when it was finally passed?
Yeah, my first reaction was it's about damn time, because I've been on this for a while, that I think that there's so much money being made by everybody except for the ones that are doing the hardest work and taking the greatest risk, in my opinion. And so I'm really excited to see these young men and women be able to uh, not necessarily make a living off of this, but be able to take home some small piece of what is going on around them. The schools have huge advertising deals, so it would make sense to the players that are performing well to increase the cachet of the school would be getting involved in that also. So I'm really excited for these players, and um, yeah, I just think that it's been a long time coming, and we've seen this sort of go from 1984. The Supreme Court considers Board of Regents and the NCAA case, and that's the last time that they really touched it until they reviewed the Alston case this past spring.
Right, and there is some pretty big verbiage in the dissenting opinion, I think, by one of the
Yeah, the
justices.
concurrence. Yeah.
The
Yeah, and that was Kavanaugh's concurrence, where he's basically saying, yes, these collegiate athletics are part of the fabric of this country, but in no other venue would a business be able to say that our most notable factor, our defining characteristic, is that we don't pay our labor. And so he said the NCAA is not above the law, and I think that really kind of laid the groundwork, in addition to some other cases and some other things that were going on at the time concurrently with that decision, that have really gotten us to where we are now.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be like if McDonald's said, no, our customers really prefer our food because we don't pay our employees, and that's why we shouldn't pay our employees.
Yeah, and to take it even a step further, nobody would eat here if we paid our employees,
Right.
which is like ludicrous to think of in any other sphere for somebody to say that. And the reason that the NCAA has been able to hang on to that, I mentioned that Board of Regents case. There is some dicta, which is basically what we would think of as like throwaway language. It's not central to the point of the opinion. But at the outset of that Board of Regents opinion, which is a case that the NCAA lost, mind you,
Mm-hmm.
but there at the beginning it says that the NCAA has a very important role in maintaining amateurism and policing amateurism, and so they hung on to that for 40 years to avoid paying anybody, while in the meantime these TV contracts have gotten bigger and bigger. And so what are they spending that money on? They spend it on administrator salaries, they spend it on coaching salaries, they spend it on the facilities. I know Baylor has a beautiful football stadium. That money comes from somewhere. That's Big 12 TV money, and going to good bowl games. That's where that money comes from. And so I think NIL is great because it doesn't say, oh, the schools have to pay them. We know that these student athletes are celebrities. They're treated like that in every other way. So to allow them to take endorsement money, I think it's a no-brainer, and I'm really excited by it. But I think that there's also, these guys and gals have to be careful because there's a lot of sharks out here because it is a pretty unregulated market in a lot of places.
Right. Yeah. No. Absolutely. And then you throw in all the things you have to do when you're, a business entity, basically, because now every student athlete that's taking money is can be classified as a business entity. So that's very interesting too. Just going back to the Supreme Court case and some of your discussions, maybe that you had with the conduct detrimental team, the folks on your team. Did the term monopoly or did ever come up? Did either in the case or just in some of the arguments, things like that, of the NCAA being a monopoly? I know, like, we talk about, sports leagues kind of sometimes, may have that monopolistic power, but I was curious if that ever came up in the, NCAA cases as well.
Yeah, it was definitely discussed during the arguments, and there were questions from the justices to, to the NCAA's attorneys about that. But I think what it really comes down to is that this is an antitrust violation for all of these colleges to get together and conspire to not provide educational benefits, because that's what Alston, the case that we're discussing, is about. It's not about name, image, and likeness. It's about allowing educational benefits, education-related benefits. So, for instance, if you're a student athlete, if you were Brittany Griner, for example, when you were at Baylor, if she wanted to study abroad, currently the NCAA rules were stopping Baylor from saying, "Yeah, go ahead, you can study abroad, and we'll pay for it."
Okay.
Exactly. And so, or a laptop or something like that, these education related benefits. And so what Alston does is that it strikes through that. It says that the NCAA cannot, and its member schools and conferences cannot conspire to stop schools from paying out those benefits. The reason why it's intertwined with name, image, and likeness is that all the while that this case is moving through, and also the O'Bannon case before that, are going through the courts, which, as you know, takes a long time.
Sure.
The state of California, after O'Bannon passed a fair pay to play, I think is what it's called, and that was supposed to go into effect in 2023. Well, the people down in Florida, they saw that law and they said, why not make our date 2021? And so I think now 22 states and 16 of those are going to go into effect this year. Mm-hmm. And those states have guidelines for how student athletes can use their name, image, and likeness. So these things happening at the same time, and then Kavanaugh's really scathing concurrence that basically tells the NCAA, like, hey, nobody here is on your side. This is a unanimous opinion against you, and you're not above the law. This is how everybody's kind of thinking. That, I think, pushed the NCAA to stop standing in the way of progress. And so that's why they allowed the interim policy that you mentioned, because it's not an official policy. What they've done is basically
great point.
Abscond any sort of responsibility for this whole thing. And they've done that before. This is not like the first time, right? They kind of did that with COVID. With COVID, they left it up to the conferences and the schools to deal with, so there wasn't any leadership there. And during the UNC investigation, they said, we have nothing really to do with education. This is an educational related issue, so we don't have anything to do with it. And I think that these things, they're sort of the building blocks for the NCAA, like, ruining their own legitimacy. You're not going to enforce things properly. Like, who needs you?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of different moving parts, obviously, as things get complex, take a lot of time. But just to level set here, O'Bannon was the former student athlete at UCLA that was suing, I believe, EA Sports
and the NCAA
and
together.
The NCAA, because his image and likeness was in the video game, and that's what prompted California to pass a state law saying you can now profit,
You
start
cannot prevent you can't prevent the student athletes from being able to profit from their NIL.
correct.
And O'Bannon is that the student athletes were saying, hey, you have to compensate us when you're using our name, image, and likeness for commercial purposes, so video games. And he eventually settled with EA Sports something like $40 million. But the judge in the O'Bannon case, Claudia Wilkin, she's in the Ninth Circuit. That is the same judge that heard the Alston case. So she would be what you might consider like an activist judge. But both of those cases went on to be reheard by the entire Ninth Circuit, and then Alston finally got to the Supreme Court.
And then the Alston case was, like you described, seeking additional educational benefits. The school was like, well, we can't pay for this, and the courts say, oh, well, yeah, you have to, like, you can't prevent that for an educational purpose. You combine the two together, now you have NIL. And as you mentioned, you pointed out, it is an interim policy by the NCAA to go into effect. I think also a key reason for that was the NCAA was trying to lobby Congress to pass federal legislation. So it was, so you'd have federal legislation instead of state legislation, like the Californias, Floridas, because Texas, every state's going to be different of the 22 states that have legislation in place signed by the governor and are active. They didn't get that from the federal level, so they had to pass this in order to kind of CYA cover their own butt situation, which basically, let's jump right into this. It basically says that the three main takeaways of the interim policy that I would describe is you can profit off your name, image, and likeness, take deals, etc. We're not going to stop you. There's no recruiting violations. There's no suspensions. We're not going to take away records. Number two is, you can, you can profit off of it. Number two is we can't be just like blunt about just paying athletes for pay. So you still can't pay, Tarun, you score 2 touchdowns this game, I'll give you $1,000, right? No pay for play. And you can't pay high school recruits to come to your school. Just some basic standard. Hey, this is definitely outside the box. Nearly 98% of the population would agree with these statements. And then lastly, you have to, we're leaving it up to either the institution or the state to give you the guidance to follow the laws. So if you want to make it more strict, as a school by school basis, as a member institution, that's on you guys. That's not on us. Again, kind of absolving themselves of responsibility, accountability, leadership from that standpoint. And, or if there's a state law in place, you have to follow that state law. Any other things that you'd like to add there? Was that pretty good summary?
Yeah, I think that's really good. One other thing that I would mention is that now the players, the student athletes, are able to seek representation, which is something that was banned for a long time. But now they can seek representation for these marketing deals. So you can have a lawyer, an agent, read over these deals. And actually, if there are any student athletes listening to this, I would highly recommend that an attorney or an agent reviews your deals, because what this is like a temporary thing. For some people, this is it. This is all the money that they'll ever make off of their athletic fame. But going forward, a lot of these athletes are going to be able to make money off their athletic fame later once they turn professional. And you don't want to have clauses in any contracts that are going to prevent you from being able to take maximum advantage of it once you're free and clear to agree with any company, agree to a deal with any company, not just the ones that are kind of within these set parameters.
Right. That's a terrific point and terrific advice. And I know, Dan or whoever's running the Conduct Detrimental Twitter account pointed out with the Barstool Athlete program, a bunch of student athletes wanting to be a part of this Barstool Athlete program pointed out, hey, this, Barstool is, has ties to a gambling corporation as well. They're doing a lot of gambling. There's, that's a multi-entity and faceted company now from where it, once started as just a newsletter. Pretty incredible to see what was built there. But hey, this is going to get complex, right? This isn't just black and white. And so be careful. I was curious your thoughts on the whole Barstool athlete thing and kind of what all that entails.
Yeah, so the gambling tie that you're mentioning, Penn National Gaming owns a 36% stake in Barstool, and they use Barstool's branding to sell their gambling games in, I think, 4 states or something like that. So yeah, what Dan was bringing up, it's a great point. I think it's as much about Barstool as it is about the NCAA kind of like leaving things in the wind. The issue here is that there's no clear guidance, there's no uniform guidance, and they could have had this. They could have had this last year or the year before or forever, and they chose not to do it. The NCAA and the conferences chose not to do it either. We could have had this result in a better, more uniform policy where things are more out in the open. And so with Barstool, I think it's a great program that basically they're just giving free swag to these student athletes. And so what they've done now is file paperwork so that Barstool Athletics is like a separate entity from the rest of the group. And I'm not sure if it were to go to court, whether that would be enough. You might have a judge that looks at that and says, hey, this is the same company. This is Penn National Gaming under a different name. But I really don't see a reason for them to do that. And hopefully, the Barstool lawyers, they know more than me. I think that it should be okay.
Because that was my understanding as well. It was basically like, hey, like you want free stuff, like we'll give you free stuff, right? I think Dave in his video said like, we'll give you pizza, we'll give you shirts, like, yeah, come to, like, for sure, like what the hell basically is what he said in this minute video. And remember, you couldn't do that in the past. You couldn't sell memorabilia, you couldn't you couldn't accept a t-shirt for free. You couldn't accept basically anything. You were handcuffed into not doing anything that wasn't, allowed for a normal non-student athlete, enrolled at the, at the university. And to me, and, I wanted to turn this to you, there seems to be a difference between De'Aaron King at the University of Miami, the quarterback there, signing a sponsorship deal for about $20,000 with college hunks hauling junk, and Barstool just giving a t-shirt to a bunch of these athletes, because a bunch of these athletes are like could be D3, could be D2, smaller school, not an offensive lineman, that's not like a face of the program type thing, which there's nothing wrong with any of that, but it seems like if I'm giving them t-shirts, if I'm not actually giving them money per se, if I'm just giving them like some t-shirts, I don't think anybody's like going to be throwing games or mimicking the spread because they're getting a Barstool t-shirt. I could be, it seems less, it seems lesser to me, but
yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I don't think that we have to worry about any sort of point shaving because like D3 offensive lineman got a Barstool sweatshirt or something like that. It is interesting that this is even a conversation, and the reason that is a lot of these NIL policies, the ones that exist, because there are so many schools that haven't made one clear. I went looking for the Minnesota one the other day and could not find one, so hopefully they're going to post one at some point. But for the schools that have posted them, so I was looking at the University of Kentucky's, and they have separate provisions that say like you can't sign with what we could call like the vice companies, so gambling, alcohol, marijuana, nicotine, tobacco, that kind of thing, adult entertainment, and then the other aspect of that is like you can't sign with another apparel company. So I don't know, like, do you think that Barstool qualifies as an apparel company? Barstool does a lot of work with like Nike and other clothing companies, so I'm not sure that they would be like their own thing. But I know that that was like one thing that was always talked about. Like, what if say a Baylor football player, they're sponsored by Nike, and then they get a deal from Adidas. Could they wear Adidas stuff? And the answer is no. The schools thought about that too. The ones that have announced things already, anyway.
Right. Yeah. So to your point on Baylor, a Nike school, they have a contract with Nike. So no student athlete could do a deal sponsorship with Adidas, Under Armour, et cetera. You make a good point about is Barstool an apparel company? I think I would probably say no. I mean, that's just me.
Yeah.
I'd probably lean no, but you could not, Barstool has all those like, Barstool Twitter accounts for each individual school or most of the big ones. They wouldn't be able to have like a Barstool shirt with a Baylor logo, for example, or a Minnesota logo. A lot of that co-branding is prohibited as well. And going back to the Baylor, Nike thing, the Texas state law, I was fortunate enough to be on a press conference Zoom call with the compliance director there, the AD of compliance and the AD of external affairs, and they really laid it out, the rules pretty clearly, as clearly as they could, because Texas does have a state law. So Baylor, like any other institution, is required to follow the Texas state law. There's a morality clause in the Texas state law. None of the vice companies, basically, beer, tobacco, et cetera, that you mentioned. But there's also a clause in there that says a school can nullify a deal if it conflicts with a contract, a school university contract. So they can nix it. And then there's another clause in the Texas state law that says all student athletes must disclose the NIL deal before enacting upon it to their university. So it doesn't matter if you're Texas, TCU, Baylor, you have to take that NIL deal. You have to show to your compliance department, tell them what you're about to do, and they need to still, give it their blessing. And usually in the past, usually that answer is, 99.9% of the time going to be no. It's probably flipped on its head. Probably 90% of the time it's going to be yes now. But there are some provisions in it. That they have to follow. You can't just partner with Bud Light. You can't partner with Adidas if you're Nike, vice versa. And you can't. There's another clause in the Texas state law that says you can't co-brand, right? So if somebody wanted to, use you to, like if a player created their own logo and trademark, like they couldn't do that on a Nike t-shirt with Baylor stuff on it, or hey, I love this barbecue sandwich and I'm eating right in front of the basketball gym here on campus. You can't promote stuff on campus. That can't, the physical property and intellectual property cannot, you can't use either of them in your NIL deals at the university, at least according to Texas. And that's kind of where it gets tricky. And I want to turn it over to you. You looking at the map of what states have laws, and I'm not sure how deeply you've kind of investigated, different state laws and, institutional policies and things like that. But they could all be different. State law may not have a morality clause in it, and just like, hey, just don't do anything, illegal. But if you're 21 and you want to drink, like, we won't stop you, type thing.
Yeah, I think that that's really good information. I think it again demonstrates the point that I really want to make, is that there's so much going on. There's so much nuance to this, and not a lot of leadership in the space. So you're saying that the AD of compliance is that at Baylor?
At Baylor, yes.
Yeah. So good for them that they were able to
yeah.
do that press conference, because that sounds like then that the student athletes are getting the necessary guidance. Because to me, there's nothing more important than preserving one's eligibility. And so I think that there just needs to be a lot more leadership in this space. And you would ordinarily think that maybe the NCAA would do it, but they've kind of tucked tail and run here. So I think that demonstrates it. So I agree with you that it's very much on the state level. And one of those that I heard about, there's another state that's currently considering NIL legislation, but it would allow the boosters to directly give out the contracts. And I think that that's different from some other states. And I don't remember exactly which state it is. So sorry about that. But there's going to be differences. I'm sure that I'm interested to see whether that's going to lead to any sort of recruiting changes. Like, is anybody going to be able to recruit better because their boosters can get more involved? I'm not sure.
So,
I mean, we know that they've been involved to some extent, right? But it's always been under the table, like, Rep Bomar gets a job at the car dealership or something like that. But now it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more accepted, and these things are coming out into light. I'm interested to see if there's going to be any changes, and we might not know for 5-10 years down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yes, it's always kind of been going on behind closed doors in smoke-filled rooms. Everybody kind of wants to be in the room where it happens. And to some extent, that's still going to be the case. I think there's still going to be a lot of maneuvering, but a lot more, it's going to be okay if it's public. It's not going to be the end of the world. If you pay for someone's sandwich at the diner or whatever, you can't do a cash bag drop or whatever. That's still illegal according to the policies in place now. But yeah, that's why I wanted to ask you as well, because I think you make up a good point. The Texas, again, going back to the Texas legislation, just because I was lucky enough to get a crash course at the press conference, and you can look up, I'm sure any of these laws, you can look up the bill that passed for Texas. But one of them is you can't pay high school recruits. High school recruits can't do NIL deals, which seems almost a little counterintuitive if college students can, but not high school students. Like, think about Zion in high school. He was already, blowing up and everything like that. But to the point, how do you see NIL? What do you think the future looks like? We may not know, but what are your guesses on, are some smaller schools going to be able to recruit better? What do you think we see from all this? Or do we see like kind of a house of cards, at least initially, kind of collapsing on itself until we have a uniform piece of legislation?
Yeah, I think the point you make, I'm so glad that you brought up high school, because that is an area where there's big differences. And you can see the arguments that it's like the National Federation of High School Association, that's like what most of the high schools play under, public high schools. And their leadership is making very similar arguments to the ones that we heard from NCAA leadership, whether it be Miles Brand or Mark Emmert now, or whoever was before Miles Brand. But as far back as I can remember, these are students. We don't want them to be professionals. We want to keep high school sports the way that they are. And if you had just taken whatever it was, high school sports, and substitute college sports, it's the same arguments that we've been hearing for the last several decades. So I think that there is going to have to be some sort of decision made there, because there are going to be differences. So, for instance, the kid who plays LeBron's son in this new Space Jam movie, I was reading a Washington Post article, and he is like a 4-star recruit for football. He's like a really good running back from California. And he wasn't sure whether he was going to be able to act in movies. It's a passion of his. Wow. If he wanted to pursue his, his college football dreams. But he's worked it out with USC. So he has an offer to go play football there. They know that he's made money from this movie, and I think that they're okay with it. So that is a big gray area, and I think that they're going to have to address that.
Wow. So he's a running back, 4-star running back in high school currently in California.
Yep.
And he plays LeBron's son in this new Space Jam movie.
Yes.
And he's committed verbally or signed some sort of letter of intent to go to USC, the Trojans.
Yes.
Play
yes.
there. So.
And And they're aware that he's made money off of the movie, and they're okay with it.
So, I mean, it's just interesting. I don't know the California state law, right? It seems
Yeah,
like,
and that's also not exactly NIL, right? Like, because he didn't get that acting job because of his athletic fame. So there's just no like line in the sand, and it would just be helpful to have more guidance. But that's where like a larger body like the NCAA would come. But as soon as they realized that they weren't going to get federal help, because what they wanted with the federal help
yeah,
was for the federal government to say, okay, NCAA, you're the arbiter. What is okay and what is not okay? Because that would have empowered them more.
right.
And because they don't feel that they have the power, or they're just not interested in getting into the weeds on this, so they're leaving it to everybody else to figure out. I think that there are going to be growing pains with it. So you ask where we're going eventually. I think that there might be a little bit of a bubble that pops at some point, and what that ultimately entails, whether mid-level guys aren't getting deals and it's only the top guys, that might be it. But what I think is going to be the best benefit and what the legacy of this is, you look at cheerleaders. That cheerleaders, it's like an NCAA sport, but it's not governed by the NCAA.
Right.
So they've been able to do endorsements and stuff like that. There was a big New York Times article about it last year, 2 years ago, when NIL was really entering the frame. And and I think that female athletes, based on a lot of factors, including their social media presence, is going to allow them to profit in a way that they may not have ever imagined being able to do so before. And so, as we go forward, I think that that's going to be a really great benefit to women's athletics.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. The Cavender sisters, they play basketball at Fresno State on the women's
Yep.
basketball team there, and they signed a deal with Boost Mobile, and they announced it in Times Square on the ticker and everything like that. And they have like 3 million TikTok followers.
Yep.
So very very interesting to kind of see the types of deals that are already being formed, and what creative deals could potentially come next. I think my mind just races with definitely a bunch of different scenarios. You mentioned the recruiting. I definitely think this will help play to some of the smaller schools in like what you could call quote unquote true college towns, right? The best athletes are still going to go to the best schools for their respective sports, more than likely. But with this, if you're a really good athlete, there might be now a reason to consider a college town school like a Waco, like a Madison, Wisconsin, to go there, because there are specific businesses that are homegrown to that area. There's maybe specific donors for a school. Oklahoma State comes to mind with like Boone Pickens, right?
Yep.
Like Drain McClain is a Baylor alum. He donated a majority for McLean Stadium to be built. And when I say my mind races, like you could probably, again, in smoke-filled rooms and behind closed doors, kind of structure some things to where it's all legal and everything like that, but where like donors are funding these businesses and their pure marketing plan is to sponsor Baylor athletes or Oklahoma State athletes, and you have now millions of dollars to just do that. It'll be interesting to see if the product on the field improves as a result, if something like that were to happen. But I definitely think there's a benefit there for maybe smaller schools that couldn't compete with the Alabamas or the Texases or what have you. There was a question in my mind that I wanted to ask you, and I totally forgot as I went on that little rant right there.
No, that's great.
Recruiting.
Yeah, I agree that it is going to benefit the smaller schools, but I do think that there's something to, like, the Dukes and the Alabamas of the world are going to
Sure.
benefit from just having the platform already, because they've had their stars on display for a long time. And yeah, so did you want to ask, you cut this, right?
Usually just post it all live.
Oh,
But
really?
yeah, I just record it and stream it. I don't have time to go
Okay.
and cut it. We're live. But it's in the lounge. It's the lounge. We're casual. We're
Yeah.
just talking. I look probably worse than you think you might look. So it's
No, no, no. It's all
all good.
good. No, no, no. You were talking offline about like some of the deals that you've seen. Have you had like a favorite deal? The college hunks hauling junk one is funny.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good one. I just recently saw a deal, and I wanted to ask for your flavor as well. But the Wisconsin, I think this either restaurant or barbecue joint in Wisconsin, again Madison, Wisconsin, is now like the official like O-line restaurant in Madison or something, and they're sponsoring
Awesome.
the offensive line. It's like the official offensive restaurant of the Wisconsin offensive line,
Yeah,
right?
so that's very similar to another one that I saw. Kenny Pickett, the Pitt
Yes.
quarterback, he signed up with the Oaklander, and they're in hotel restaurant, and so he's going to be able to take his offensive line to dinner every week, which I think is awesome. There's no better way to ingratiate yourself to the guys that are keeping you upright than to take them to a all expenses paid dinner at a steakhouse.
I thought that was so cool because I saw that as well. And I thought that was so cool for the reason of a lot of people have been saying like now it's going to be like more, even more me culture, self-centered, self-fulfilling. And he specifically said like, hey, I wanted my first NIL deal to, even though I'm the quarterback of Pitt, to be for the guys protecting me. And you see that a lot in the NFL, running backs or quarterbacks, gifting their offensive line, things like that. You can't really do that in college unless you come from like a really wealthy family and you want to, even then I'm not sure if you probably couldn't do it even back in the day, even if you were well off. But this was, I thought, really, really cool. And when you talk and think about like just building your own personal brand, I think that puts him light years ahead of everybody else. And that's what I'm interested to see, the craftiness of, how are you constructing brands? How are you building your network around that to position yourself not only for, to make like, $10,000 in college, but position you for a, maybe more lucrative success afterwards, type thing.
Yeah, I agree with you that I think it's a good locker room thing. Have you seen Draft Day? Vontae Mack, no matter what.
No, I
Kevin
have
Costner. Oh, it's good. You should watch it. He's the GM of the Browns.
the Browns. Yeah.
Yeah, and Chadwick Boseman is this linebacker at Ohio State. But uh, anyway, like they have a quarterback, and he's like weighing whether to take this linebacker Chadwick Boseman or the quarterback. And spoiler alert, nobody goes to the quarterback's birthday, and that's like somehow some huge thing. Like, oh, no one liked him. Well, but like this, this quarterback, he takes the offensive line to dinner every week. Like he couldn't look better as from a character perspective.
Right. Yeah. Even if he's, he could get like a 5-year career, 10-year career in the NFL, just being like a journey. I don't know. If it doesn't pan out, he could definitely spend some time in the NFL just for this deal alone, and that's a few years of employment. Sitting on the bench, no risk injury, injury of
That's
risk.
the best job in sports. Like that and bullpen catcher are so good to like just not be somebody who is gonna actually suffer harm.
It's very
That's
like an Alex Moran thought.
oh, exactly.
Okay, yeah, you caught the reference.
That's
Man,
all
but
he wanted, and then
I
he
know
got the
that's all.
job.
That's all we wanted. The question came back to me from earlier. We talked about the O'Bannon case with suing the NCAA and EA Sports, and ultimately settling for EA Sports. I think one, that's a thing that people are like, hey, bring this back, bring this back. I don't think that's coming back for the simple reason of there were a bunch of different state laws and different policies. So I don't think EA Sports could use every single school just due to the legislation that's out there. But I was thinking again from a television rights standpoint, right? You mentioned earlier that TV rights and contracts have just gone up and up and up of the revenues, the student athletes are still seeing no piece of that. And one of the things that I was curious about, and I'd love for you to weigh in, is that ever, are they ever going to see a piece of that? Or, what happens when that, gets brought up? Because, basically, can they profit off of being on television? Would be my question. If I was a student athlete, and now if just being generally curious, right? Like, think about all the different mini series and shows that ESPN will do on ESPN Plus, like following Oklahoma State or football or like Duke basketball or whatever. If I'm a student athlete, why should I do that show if ESPN isn't going to pay me?
Yeah. So a couple things. First of all, with the video game, I think that is going to come back. What game mode did you play the most on the NCAA games? Like, what was your favorite game mode?
I think just regular.
Like did you played like the road the like the road to the Heisman or the dynasty or like
Dynasty,
what?
I would say.
Yeah, dynasty, right?
Yeah.
Because you play for the schools. Like you enjoy playing with the players that you know maybe for a couple of seasons, but then those guys go. And then I always liked the recruiting and stuff like that. So I think it is going to come back. And they already have an agreement, I think, with CCL is what it's called. And that's like a group of colleges that bind their brands together. And then like they'll make money off of it in the same way that like Major League Baseball teams sign their logos and rights away for the MLB game. They would do this for college football. So it's not going to include all the teams. It's not going to include like Notre Dame, I think, but it'll include other big schools. So I think that it could come back in that form, and they would just do like nameless, faceless characters and just have you generate a roster. So it was completely random. It wasn't like, that number one on Ohio State is going to be Justin Fields and it's him. It would be up to the individuals to do it.
Gotcha. So I should have clarified. I don't see how they can use the name, image, and likeness within a video game, moving forward.
Yeah, I think they could if they paid them, but I think it's going to be really hard to negotiate a pay for everyone. I think that the only way that we would see the student athletes profit from it, and I think that it's the same way that the only way that we would see them profit in like a like to be on TV like during the NCAA tournament or something would be to have some sort of union. And as you know, you grew up a Northwestern fan, so I'm sure you followed Kane Coulter and that effort to unionize. And the guy Peter Orr, who heard that argument and initially ruled for the players to form the union, he's now like the acting general counsel for the NLRB under Biden. So is it possible down the line that college football players and players of different sports could unionize? Yeah, I think that's possible. And then they might be able to profit from being on March Madness or whatever. But I think that remains to be seen. And I'm not sure whether we would really like the form that took long term. So that I think that's something for the future. But in terms of like wanting to be yeah, they followed Duke basketball the Zion year, like on their preseason trip to Canada and the summer and stuff like that. And I think that the benefit to being on that is that people see you and they can fall in love with you from the beginning, and then maybe that makes you more endorsement dollars down the line. I'm not sure if you necessarily need to be paid for that. That one might just be for exposure. But even if I'm ESPN and like they say, $5,000 a player or something like that, maybe I do that anyway because I make way more broadcasting and advertisements and ESPN Plus subscriptions.
Yeah, right. Even if you can get right, subscription base, at some point, looking at Excel spreadsheets, it's gonna justify paying everybody involved. And so there are kind of two issues at hand there with either the video games or the TV revenues and for the players, right? One is kind of what you just mentioned, like should it just be exposure and everything like that. But two, and it might not just logistically make sense, right? But two is if you did pay the players for being on those shows or whatever, I'm not sure if legally every state would allow that. Just going back to Texas real quick, there's a provision in there that says players cannot have NIL deals that are with that include the intellectual or physical property of the university. So that means deals standing on campus. That means deals with a BU or even Sikkim Bears on the same shirt or whatever, or in their video that the student athlete may post. And it even means like they can't make money off of deals during team activities. So as at least for Texas athletes, at least when they travel to and from games, if they're at practice, if they're on campus, technically by the Texas law, at least as how I understand it, is they can't do, a social media post or a film, a video, like selfie, like, hey guys, we're walking through the airport or getting ready to take off to go play Kansas or Texas or whatever.
They couldn't do like a cameo video.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the same thing with I would imagine it's the same thing like ESPN or the Magnolia Network in Waco, which I thought could be a huge boost for recruiting. Like, hey, Chip and Joanna Gaines, they have their own TV network. I thought that could be like a huge play for everybody involved. That apparently, they can't go to Baylor and say, hey, we'll pay like ESPN, any TV network, say we'll pay the university to use your stuff, we'll pay the players, and then we'll get our ad subscriptions or what have you. At least in Texas, that answer is no for now. It's just all very interesting. I think about a lot of those things, but from a legal standpoint, that's why I'm like, I don't even know if it's possible because there's no uniform legislation. I don't know. Does Minnesota have a state law yet?
No. And actually, if I'm a student athlete, I would prefer not to have a state law.
I agree.
I would want it to be as free and clear as it could possibly be.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But also, the university hasn't put out a policy so far as I can see. And I'm not sure what that means for Minnesota student athletes. I hope that they get some clarity, or maybe I'm missing something and they've already gotten it. But
yeah, it might just be internal. They haven't published anything. Baylor didn't come out with a huge PR on social media statement or anything like that. I haven't scoured their website for it, but yeah, every instance it's going to be unique, and there's going to be questions around every single deal. But with that said, I kind of wanted to end on a kind of a lighthearted note. If you were a student athlete, kind of knowing everything you know now and everything like that, if you could go back, you're a student athlete, pick your sport, pick your school, where are you going, and then what NIL deals are you constructing, in your NIL athlete business model?
Yeah, so if I thought one of the funnier answers that I heard was JJ Redick saying that he would be sponsored by Shooters, which is like a Western themed college bar in Durham, which I just thought that was awesome. But I'll do it based off of where I went. So having gone to Hampton-Sydney, which is a small D3 school, assuming anybody cared enough to pay me money, there's like a little shack that is like part convenience store, part restaurant, and they had great fried chicken and all sorts of Southern fixins, and it was called Granny B's. So I would be sponsored by them. I always loved going there after tailgating and getting like Brunswick stew, then taking a nap, rallying for the evening festivities. So I would definitely love for them to sponsor me, get some free stew.
That's awesome.
What about you?
Yeah, I'd probably do. I mean, Chip and Joanna, they weren't there. They weren't as big as and have everything that they have now. But um, that was definitely the first thing that came to mind. Do some sort of show or series on the Magnolia Network, specifically for the brand. I understand. I mean, I just laid it out myself. There are some obvious complexities around there with the Texas state laws and everything like that. But I guess if I could go back, I'd probably do some, because my knowledge isn't as what it is now. I'd probably do some sort of like food place, like, yo, yeah, give me free food and I'll promote it for sure. Like, have me come in and do food challenges, or as long as I can eat for free. Like,
I would have been so easy to convince in college. They really missed the boat there.
yeah, I think if I was, now that I'm in, have some few years of experience of, kind of understanding different things about business and whatnot, I think I would definitely say, like, yeah, give me like some sort of, equity stake in the business, and I'll promote the heck out of it. Either equity stake in the local business, or profit sharing model, or like um, right, give me stock, like just give me like Apple stock or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And
Well, I
some
know that you and your father-in-law did a bunch of home improvement projects. It would have been very awesome to just have Chip and his team get in there and do it for you.
right, yeah, exactly. So yeah, like anything to like kind of take, like, where I don't have to do it, or whatever. Like, I'm very lazy in that sense. So uh, that's kind of what I'd be looking for in my NIL deal. Can you give me money without even trying, that I can just keep cashing a check like every year or something, or give me free food, or free labor, something like that, is definitely what I would do in my crude NIL business model as a student athlete.
I love it. I love it.
So obviously a long way to go, lots of different challenges and pitfalls to be coming up, but hopefully a lot of good things, like the Pitt quarterback story, right? So I think a lot of good will come from this as well. Taryn, where can everybody find you, all your work, on social media and
Yeah.
elsewhere?
Yeah, I'm at on Twitter most frequently uh, at TK Sharma, Sharma law, and I think that that's pretty consistent throughout social media. So yeah, uh, find me on there, and I'd love to talk more about this or anything else that's sports related. And yeah, Minor buddy, really enjoyed it, and we're overdue for a Levy Bowl, so I'm hoping that we can all get back this fall and be able to do that.
Yeah, December, hopefully some pickup football around the holidays. That'd be great. Taryn, thank you so much for joining the Minor Lounge. Third year law student at University of Minnesota, does a lot of great work for Conduct Detrimental, and I look forward to seeing you and reading your opinions on the Supreme Court deciding future NIL cases and else and other things.
Thanks, buddy.